Ava, I need you to empty your pockets. Now. The words pierced the quiet of the mansion like a sharp blade. Standing firm in the kitchen doorway was Richard Langston, 62 years old, a real estate tycoon whose gaze was cold and unrelenting. He blocked the only exit, his tall frame casting a shadow over the woman who had worked under his roof for the past 8 months. Ava Sinclair, a 35-year-old black woman, paused. She was calmly drying her hands on a dish towel when she turned, slowly, to face him. Their eyes met. But what Richard saw in her expression was not fear. It wasn't guilt. It was calm. Eerily calm, almost as if she had been expecting this moment. "Is there a problem, Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice cool, composed, and professional. But beneath that calm tone was something else. A quiet steeliness that hadn't been there before. "My wife says her diamond bracelet is missing from the bedroom," Richard stated. "It's worth over $15,000. You were the only one who cleaned that room today." His arms crossed. The accusation hung in the still air like poison. Richard Langston had built a vast empire, believing people like Ava were simple, predictable, easy to intimidate, and even easier to dismiss. Over the years, he'd quietly let go of dozens of black employees under suspicious accusations, confident they'd leave quietly to avoid legal battles or stained reputations. Ava didn't flinch. She simply folded the towel with precision, her hands steady. "So I'm the first person you thought of," she said softly. "Interesting. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," Richard pressed, his tone shifting into the condescension he usually reserved for boardroom negotiations. "You have a daughter, don't you? I know money's tight. Maybe you just got confused about what was yours." Then Ava did something he didn't expect. She smiled. But it wasn't a nervous or apologetic smile. It was a knowing one, the kind someone gives when a long-buried truth is finally exposed. "Mr. Harrison," she said calmly, pulling her phone out of her pocket with slow, deliberate movements before I turn my pockets inside out. "Maybe we should call the police. I'm sure they'd love to look into a $15,000 theft." Richard froze. This wasn't the script he had imagined. A guilty person should have been pleading, stammering, trying to explain, not calling the police themselves, not standing this tall, this steady. For 8 months, Ava had quietly observed him. She'd seen how he sneered at the Hispanic landscapers, heard the way he spoke to the black delivery guy at the pharmacy, listened as he ranted on the phone about lazy people, and his belief that some were naturally criminal. He never hid his contempt, not from people like her. "That's not necessary," Richard said quickly. "If you just cooperate." "Oh, but I insist," Ava interrupted, her voice now cutting through his like ice. And for the first time since hiring her, Richard realized she wasn't speaking like a maid anymore. "In fact," she added, "I have some very interesting things to show the officers when they arrive." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her smile widened, unsettling Richard even more. "Ah, perfect timing," she murmured, tapping out a quick reply. "Looks like my guests are arriving a little early tonight." She began emptying her pockets, one item at a time. House keys, a pack of gum, a used tissue. Nothing more. No bracelet, no evidence, no guilt. She held out her empty palms, satisfied. But before Richard could respond, the doorbell rang, then rang again. And again. The sound bounced off the mansion walls like a drumbeat, urgent and insistent. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison," Ava said, her footsteps confident as she moved toward the door. "But I have a feeling this conversation is just beginning." Richard stood frozen. For the first time, he saw her clearly, not as the help, but as a force to be reckoned with. Every step she took down that hallway seemed measured, rehearsed, like she wasn't shocked by the accusation, but waiting for it, planning for it. Then came the voices from the hallway, multiple people, some speaking English, others in Spanish. Richard's brow furrowed. How many had she let in? And how did she even have keys? "Mr. Harrison," Ava's voice called out from the front hall. It no longer sounded like a maid's voice. It rang with calm authority. "Would you please join us in the living room? We have quite a bit to discuss." And for the first time in decades, Richard Langston felt something he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't in control, and worse, Ava was. Sometimes justice arrives from places we least expect. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to see how a simple accusation would unravel years of hidden prejudice and change the lives of everyone involved. Richard followed Ava into the living room and froze. Seated on his expensive Italian leather sofa were three black women, none of whom he had allowed into his home. Beside them, a sharply dressed man was laying out documents on Richard's glass coffee table, as if this meeting had been scheduled all along. "What the hell is going on here?" Richard shouted, his voice bouncing off the marble walls and priceless artwork. "Ava, who are these people? And how did they get into my house?" Ava's voice remained unsettlingly composed. "Mr. Harrison, allow me to introduce you. This is Ms. Carter. She worked for you 2 years ago. Next to her is Ms. Bennett. She lasted 6 months. And this is Ms. Freeman, who cleaned this home for 4 years, until she was accused of stealing a ring that later turned up in your wife's car." Richard's face went pale. He recognized them, vaguely, women he had fired under clouds of suspicion, accused of theft, dismissed without a second thought. No references, no apology, just erased like a file deleted from a system. "And this," Ava continued, gesturing to the man in the suit, "is Dr. Nathan Ellis, an attorney who specializes in racial discrimination and wrongful termination." Dr. Ellis stood and extended his hand. Richard didn't take it. "For the last 8 months, Roberts said, my client, Miss Thompson, has been gathering evidence of a disturbing pattern, a string of false accusations and targeted firings of black maids working in this home." "Ridiculous," Richard barked, his face now flushed with anger. "I have every right to protect my property. If things go missing and these people are the only ones with access, that these people are automatically to blame." Ava cut in, her voice now charged with a quiet rage that made Richard instinctively step back. "The black women are born thieves, that we're never deserving of the benefit of the doubt, that our families, our integrity, our needs mean nothing." Ms. Carter, now in her 60s, finally spoke. "You accused me of stealing $500 from your office. You told me I was typical of my people, that I should know my place." Her voice trembled, but not with fear, with truth. "I lost my job. I lost my home because no one would hire me after what you said. A week later, you found the money in your coat pocket." Richard looked down, unable to meet her eyes. I remember," he muttered. "But you never called me," she continued. "You never apologized. You never cared." Ava moved toward the window, looking out over the perfectly trimmed hedges and marble fountains. For 8 months, she had worked under this roof. But she hadn't just been a maid, she had been documenting everything. With a degree in investigative journalism, Ava had once written for a respected local paper. That ended when she began exposing discriminatory hiring practices among Seattle's elite. When she lost her job, she took a housekeeping position just to survive, and found herself inside the very system she used to investigate. "You know what first caught my attention?" she asked, turning from the window with a fire in her eyes that made Richard recoil. "It was a phone call. You were laughing with your lawyer about how easy it was to get rid of colored help when you needed a scapegoat." Richard's throat tightened. He vaguely recalled the conversation. A joke, a moment of arrogance he thought had vanished into thin air. But Ava had been listening. "Or maybe it was when you told your accountant," she continued, "that mysterious losses were a convenient excuse for layoffs. And you said, and I quote, 'It helps keep those people away from respectable families.'" Dr. Ellis opened a folder and began laying out documents on the table. "For 8 months, he said, Ava recorded phone calls, took photographs, and collected testimonies. We've identified at least 12 black maids terminated from this home over the last 5 years, all for alleged thefts, none of which were proven." "You can't prove anything," Richard snapped, but the arrogance had drained from his voice, replaced by the tremble of a man beginning to realize his foundation was cracking. "Oh, but we can," Ava said with a small, confident smile. She pulled out her phone and tapped a recording. Richard's voice rang out, unmistakably clear. "This Ava seems perfect. She looks like she'd steal if she had the chance. When the next incident happens, she'll be the perfect scapegoat. Those people always have a relative who needs money." Silence followed, thick, suffocating. Richard looked around the room, his eyes landing on the women whose lives he had shattered. Their faces were no longer the background blur of memory. They were mirrors reflecting his prejudice, his power, his carelessness. "My wife's bracelet," he said suddenly, trying to salvage a shred of control. "It's still missing. That's not made up. You can't deny that." Ava slowly walked over to the fireplace, reached behind a framed wedding photo, and retrieved something that caught the light like a spark of truth. The diamond bracelet. She held it up, her tone calm, deliberate. "It was right here, exactly where your wife left it. Before she took a shower last night. She forgot. I found it this morning while dusting, but I decided to wait, to see just how far your imagination and your racism would take you." Richard's legs nearly gave out beneath him. For 8 long months, he had viewed Ava Sinclair as invisible, just another disposable figure in the background of his perfectly curated life. But now, standing in his own living room, staring at the fierce determination in her eyes and the mountain of evidence building against him, Richard Langston finally understood the truth. He had walked straight into a trap of his own making, one built brick by brick with arrogance, prejudice, and cruelty. Every insult, every slight, every unjust accusation, they had only sharpened something powerful inside. Ava, a silent resilience his privileged eyes had never been trained to see. What Richard failed to realize was that every time he tried to diminish her, he was fueling the very strength that would undo him. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," Richard snapped, attempting to regain control. His voice climbed back into familiar arrogance as he grabbed his phone. "I have lawyers, contacts, judges who owe me favors. You think you can walk into my house and try to threaten me? Ava watched him dial, her expression calm, almost curious, like a scientist watching a failed experiment repeat the same mistake. She already knew the outcome. "Harvey, it's me. Richard Langston," he said quickly. "I need you at my house now. I've got people here making some outrageous accusations and—" He stopped mid-sentence. His expression shifted from angry red to pale confusion. "What do you mean you can't represent me?" he stammered. "We've been friends for 20 years. Ava didn't flinch. She knew every number in his phone before he dialed it. "Conflict of interest," Richard repeated, voice trembling. "What the hell does that mean?" Dr. Ellis, still seated, smiled faintly as he straightened the documents in front of him. "I can clarify," he said. "My office already represents Ms. Thompson and the other women here today. Any attorney who takes your case would face immediate ethical complications." Panic crept into Richard's eyes as he dialed again, then again, and again. Every call was met with vague apologies, busy schedules, or unexplained conflicts of interest. In less than 15 minutes, the man who once commanded every room with a single phone, Cole found himself utterly alone. "How did you do this?" he whispered. The last thread of confidence had snapped, and now his voice was filled with disbelief and fear. Ava stepped toward his towering bookshelf, filled with expensive volumes, chosen more for appearance than understanding. Her fingers glided across the spines as she answered. "For 8 months, I didn't just clean your house," she said softly. "I studied you. Every call you made in my presence, every name you dropped, every shady favor you offered. I was listening." She pulled a small digital recorder from behind one of the books, then another, and another. Richard's mouth fell, open in horror as she gathered hidden devices from nearly every corner of the room. "I learned that you like to make your riskiest calls from this room," she continued. "Always on Thursday mornings, when I was vacuuming the hallway." She gently placed the recorders on the coffee table. 8 months of recordings," she said, "of you bragging about rigging municipal contracts, bribing inspectors, using inside information to manipulate the real estate market." Ms. Freeman, who had remained silent until now, finally stepped forward. "She came to me 6 months ago," she said, voice steady. "Told me she believed I was innocent, and that she had a plan to prove it. I thought she was crazy. Just a maid trying to take down a millionaire." "She's not just a maid," Dr. Ellis added, opening another file. "She's an investigative journalist, Columbia University graduate. She built a career exposing corruption among the elite. She lost her job at the Cascadia Times when she started uncovering racial discrimination in corporate hiring practices." Richard's entire world tilted beneath him. For 8 months, he had dismissed her as background noise, spoken freely, arrogantly, criminally in front of someone trained to dismantle men like him, and worse, someone motivated to do it. "The maid job," Ava said, "was my disguise. It gave me access to your life, your conversations, your habits, and you handed it all to me because you never saw beyond my skin or my uniform." Then she showed him her phone. On the screen, a live stream was running, their entire confrontation broadcast live. At that moment, over 15,000 people were watching. Richard's words, his voice describing Ava as the perfect scapegoat, because she looked like someone who would steal, were playing back for all the world to hear. "The number keeps rising," she said casually. Disease. 18,000. 22,000. Most of my followers are journalists, legal activists, and people who've followed my investigations for years. They know injustice when they see it. Richard lunged forward in a last effort to snatch the phone to stop the broadcast. But Dr. Ellis rose quickly, stepping between them. "Mr. Harrison," he said firmly, "any attempt to interfere with this documentation will be considered witness intimidation. I advise you to sit down." Richard's composure shattered. "You destroyed my life," he roared, "my reputation. 20 years of building my name, my connections, my companies, and you ruined it in one afternoon. How dare you?" Ava didn't move. She didn't blink. Her voice remained even, but her words struck like steel. "No, Mr. Harrison, you destroyed your life with every lie you told. Every innocent woman you tried to ruin. Every time you believed your power made you untouchable." She looked around the room, not with triumph, but with calm clarity. "All I did," she said, "was turn the lights on." "No," Ava replied, her voice camerally, calm against the storm of panic now boiling in Richard's chest. "You didn't lose your reputation because of us. You destroyed it yourself with years of racism, discrimination, and cruelty. We simply exposed who you really are, behind the polished mask." Miss Carter stepped forward, removing an envelope from her purse. "Ava helped me file a lawsuit," she said, "not just for wrongful termination, but for emotional distress, defamation, and racial discrimination. My lawyer says, with the evidence Ava gathered, it's nearly a guaranteed win." "We're all suing," added Ms. Bennett. "Ava helped us understand our rights. She connected us with lawyers who specialize in employment discrimination. She even uncovered evidence we didn't know existed." Richard looked around his own living room and realized he no longer owned the moment. Every woman there held a piece of a puzzle he hadn't even known was being assembled. And for 8 months, Ava had quietly, methodically, used his own ego and prejudice to build the perfect case against him. His phone buzzed furiously in his pocket constant, messages flashing across the screen. Business partners, country club acquaintances, fellow elites, all reacting to the viral video now flooding social media. 12 urgent texts from his secretary. Reporters were calling. Investors were panicking. Harrison Properties is already receiving inquiries, Ava said casually, glancing at her own phone. 3 major contracts have just been cancelled. Amazing how fast people scatter when the truth starts to show. And that's when Richard finally realized. The moment in the kitchen when Ava had calmly suggested calling the police hadn't been a reaction. It had been the final act in a plan she had crafted with surgical precision. He wasn't facing a housemaid. He was facing a strategist, a professional, a woman who had outplayed him at every turn. Under the gaze of 4 women whose lives he had once dismissed, Richard finally understood. He hadn't been caught in a trap. He was the trap. His own words, his own behavior, his own arrogance, all recorded, all documented, and worst of all, she wasn't done yet. "If you had this planned," he whispered, "if you've been building this for months, what else do you know?" His voice cracked. "What haven't you shown yet? End the live stream." He suddenly barked, lunging toward Ava's phone. But Dr. Ellis calmly stepped in front of him again. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "any attempt to interfere with the Documentation of this meeting will be seen as witness intimidation. The viewer count on Ava's live feed ticked past 30,000. Ava studied Richard like a scientist observing a failing subject. She had memorized his tactics, showed how he reacted when cornered. She knew what was coming. "You don't understand," Richard shouted, his face now bright red. "I am Richard Langston. I built half this damn city. You're just a what?" Ava said, stepping forward, her voice calm and deadly. "A troublesome black woman who doesn't know her place." She paused. "Say it, Mr. Harrison. Go ahead. 35,000 people are listening." His phone kept buzzing. Panicked messages. TV networks requesting statements. Investors calling emergency meetings. His company's stock was plunging. "Ava," he said now, his tone changing, shifting into desperation. "We can work this out, civilly. How much do you want?" $50,000. $100,000 each. Silence fell over the room. Not disbelief, not even shock, just confirmation. The final nail. "He still doesn't get it," Ms. Carter muttered, shaking her head. Ava quietly walked over to her purse, pulled out a thick folder, and dropped it onto the coffee table. "For 8 months," she said, "I didn't just record your racist rants. I tracked your schemes. Would you like to see?" She spread out the photographs. Images of Richard handing envelopes to city inspectors, fake safety reports, forged contracts tied to city development projects. Richard's eyes widened with recognition and fear. "How did you get these?" he whispered. Ava gave a cold smile. "Remember when I told you I needed to work weekends to pay? For my daughter's college." He nodded slowly. "Well, my daughter graduated 5 years ago. Those weekends, I was following you to your confidential meetings." Dr. Ellis opened another file. "We also have bank records, evidence of payoffs, audio of you promising jobs in exchange for campaign favors, and documented overcharging on at least 12 public projects in the last 3 years. Richard collapsed into an armchair, completely broken. "You've been investigating me for 8 months, he said quietly. "You pretended to be a maid, just to destroy me." "No," Ava corrected. Her tone was now instructive, almost academic. "Not to destroy you, to expose you. There's a difference. It's subtle but important." Then her phone rang. She answered, pressing the speaker button. "Ava, this is Lena Morales from the Cascadia Times. We're preparing a front page. Expose on racial discrimination among Seattle's elite. Can we schedule an interview?" The final fall and the rise that followed. "Sure, Rebecca," Ava said, her voice cool and composed. "I've got plenty of material to share." More calls followed. CNN, The Washington Post, NBC News. Each new name that popped up only deepened the look of panic on Richard's face. "You know the most ironic part?" Ava said, gently closing the folder of evidence. "If you had just treated me with basic human dignity, none of this would have happened. I wasn't trying to destroy you. I was just trying to do my job, to support my family, but you couldn't see past the color of my skin." The live stream had now passed 50,000 viewers. Comments flooded in by the second. "This is justice. That man is vile. Ava is a hero." Richard, now visibly desperate, tried one last tactic. "I'll sue you, all of you, for defamation invasion of privacy, conspiracy. With what lawyers? Dr. Ellis cut in dryly. Your 5 usual firms have already notified us they won't represent you. Conflict of interest. And with what money? Ava added, stepping forward. Between the lawsuits we're about to file, the criminal investigations already in motion, and the investors pulling out left and right, Harrison Properties won't last 6 months. As if summoned by fate, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was 2 detectives from the Seattle Police Department. Mr. Harrison, the older detective said, holding up a folder, we need to speak with you about irregularities in your municipal contracts. We have a search warrant. Richard looked around his own living room, now filled with evidence, witnesses, lawyers, and cameras. His kingdom was collapsing in real. His voice cracked as he looked at Ava. How did you orchestrate all of this so perfectly? Ava stood up, straightening her blouse with the same quiet grace she had shown for 8 months. Simple, she said. You underestimated me. You couldn't see past your own prejudice. To you, I was just a black maid, invisible, ignorant, disposable. She picked up her purse and turned to the women who stood by her side, the women who would finally receive justice. And that, she said, was your greatest mistake. As the detectives began their search, and the live stream rolled, uncapturing every moment of Richard Langston's spectacular downfall, one question lingered in the air. Would a man who spent decades building walls of privilege finally understand where true strength comes from? Or would he remain trapped in the same arrogance, even as the walls crumbled around him? 6 months later, Ava Sinclair sat in her corner office on the 22nd floor of the Seattle Herald building. Her new role, Director of Investigative Journalism, a 6-figure salary, national recognition, respect she had long deserved but had to fight to earn. The story that had exposed Richard Langston became a landmark investigation, a catalyst for national conversations about racial discrimination and abuse of power. 3 universities offered her visiting professors. Her book, Invisible by Design, How the Elite Perpetuate Racism, had held a top spot on the bestseller list for 16 consecutive weeks. Across town, Richard Langston wandered the halls of his once mighty company. Of 87 properties, only 12 remained under his control. The lawsuits and criminal charges had gutted his empire. He now faced tax fraud, bribery of public officials, systemic racial discrimination, and the court of public opinion had already passed judgment. But the story didn't end there. Ms. Carter, with her settlement money, launched a cleaning business, hiring only women who had suffered workplace discrimination. Ms. Bennett went back to school and completed the nursing degree she had been forced to abandon. Dr. Ellis expanded his practice, creating a full legal department devoted to fighting racial injustice. One morning, Ava opened a letter from a young black journalist. Your story gave me the courage not to give up. I've been investigating municipal corruption in my own city. Thanks to you, I have enough evidence to take down our mayor. Then the phone rang again. Ava, said the voice on the line, this is Lena Morales from the Cascadia Times. We just got confirmation you've won the Pulitzer Prize for Investigative Journalism. That afternoon, Ava passed the empty offices that once belonged to Harrison Properties. A large for rent sign hung in the window. Behind the glass, the rooms were silent. The empire built on fear and exploitation had finally crumbled. And the irony, The man who had spent years trying to make black women invisible was undone precisely because he never noticed the power of the woman in front of him. True justice, Ava had learned, isn't just about punishment. It's about building something greater in its place. A legacy, a movement, a story that won't be forgotten. And as the city's skyline shimmered beyond her window, Ava smiled, not in revenge, but in triumph. 3 blocks away, in a cramped apartment he could barely afford, Richard Langston sat alone watching the evening news. The top story: Ava Sinclair standing tall at City Hall, receiving the city's highest civilian honor for her work in exposing systemic injustice. Richard stared at the screen, hollow. He had asked himself the same question 1,000 times. How did I not see it coming? How did I completely underestimate the very woman who brought me down? The answer, as always, was simple, painfully simple. Men like Richard never see it coming, because they never see past their own prejudice. And that blindness, that arrogant certainty that power makes you untouchable, that's exactly what made him so vulnerable to someone like Ava, someone who dared to be underestimated. If this story of how intelligence and quiet determination can turn injustice into triumph has inspired you, subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the best revenge isn't dragging your enemies down to your level. It's rising so high